When setting up the dumbbell RDL, I like and I recommend my clients to put the dumbbells on a bench or some kind of platform, have it so that when you're ready to go into the movement, you have something to unrack from. Essentially, it's not a barbell, so you're not going to have your weights in an actual rack, but they're elevated so you're not pulling from the floor initially. And as you load heavier, this will become more important. You're not pulling directly from the floor upon first pull. Once you have your dumbbells and they're on the bench or on the platform or whatever, and you're ready to essentially unrack your dumbbells from the position to perform the movement, you want your feet to be about hip bone width apart. A lot of people set their feet really wide. A lot of people also turn their toes out or turn their toes in. Pay attention to where your feet are. You want your feet to be about hip width. I actually like slightly less than hip width, hip bone width apart, especially for my ladies who have wide hips. Pay closer attention to where your feet are in terms of hip bone width apart. And my toes are straight. When I'm setting up this movement, I start fully standing. People anticipate the hinge, and so they're already ready to go. Like they're in a hinge position to start, and you want to start fully standing so you have somewhere to hinge from. Now, once I'm fully standing, I'm going to move into my hinge. When you move into the hinge, you want to have a slight bend in the knee. So right as my hips are going back, I'm also bending my knees a little bit and my chest is falling forward. This is important because a lot of people, when they're doing this exercise, will rock into the heels. And this happens one of two ways. One, they just think, okay, well, I'm moving my hips back, so that means everything, all of my weight needs to move backwards. And that's not the case. To load the heaviest and to do the movement well and to not load too much into the hinge, you actually want to maintain whole foot pressure. So pressure in both the heels and the ball of the feet. It's also why I see people rock into the heels is because they do not bend their knees at all in the hinge position. And this is because people were taught that stiff leg deadlifts were the way to go, or if I bend my knees at all, it just makes it a traditional deadlift, and that's not the case. If you're biasing a hinge in this movement, then you're going to be doing essentially an RDL. When you have excessive knee bend, you might have a little bit more of a deadlift position, but I digress. When you get set up into this movement, you actually do want to have slight bend in the knee because that gives your hips a little bit more real estate to move backwards while still maintaining whole foot pressure. And to maintain whole foot pressure as your hips move back, your knees are bent, the chest will come forward. That's another thing I see is people go into the dumbbell RDL and immediately they want to let the dumbbells fall, right? Where the weights go, that's where I go, and so I'm going to collapse forward. And they completely lose the hinge, and then they load so much into their lumbar spine. So when you set up this movement, I'm standing here, I unrack my weights, I pick my weights up. My feet are about hip bone width apart, my toes are straight, my dumbbells are in front of me, and I am fully standing. I go into the hinge, I keep whole foot pressure, and how I do this is I have slight bend in my knee, my hips move back. As a consequence of my hips moving back, my chest drives forward, and then I come back up. I do not care about how low people go in the movement. It's really when my hips run out of real estate to move backwards, and my chest is moved forward as a byproduct. Once that happens, I just come back up. And for most people, it's actually a little bit below the knee. That's usually where the hinge tends to stop for people. I've seen some people who have insane mobility, who can hinge, and their hips still go, and they can bring those dumbbells close to the floor. But for most people, once they're standing, they move into position, slight bend in the knee, whole foot pressure, my hips are going backwards, my chest is going forwards. This is about where, right below the knee, people tend to get their hips at the most posteriorly translated position they can without engaging the low back. When you do this movement, it's important to make sure that you're going controlled on that eccentric and then coming up at a normal speed as well. Don't rush through this movement. The second exercise that I'm going to show, the second variation of a dumbbell RDL, the eccentric will now be quick. So in the dumbbell quick eccentric RDL, you're still going to set up the same. Your dumbbells are going to be on some kind of platform so that you can unrack a little bit more safely. You're not wasting energy pulling from the floor. And My feet are about hip bone width apart. My toes are straight. I'm starting fully standing, right? I don't want to start already in a hinge. Don't anticipate the hinge before you need to. And whenever I'm ready to drop, now instead of slowly, slight bend in the knee, hips go back, chest goes forward. Once my hips run out of room, which is usually about right below the knee, I come back up. Instead of that very controlled eccentric here, and then pull up, I'm making this eccentric really quick so that my hamstrings are forced to absorb force in that hinge position really rapidly. So I'm here, I don't drop my dumbbells, but I drop into that hinge position really quickly, and then I come up normal speed. I drop into that hinge position really quickly, and then I come up normal speed. And this is the rhythm that you'll see whenever you do the dumbbell quick eccentric RDL. But sometimes it takes a little bit getting used to because there is a rhythm to it. You've got to actually get into the rhythm. So try a couple slow, always start lighter, and then when you do the quick eccentric, you can practice and move into a rhythm where you're going quick on the eccentric, maybe your concentric is a little bit slow because you're trying to figure out where you are. And once you get the rhythm, you can make the eccentric really quick, come up normal, and get into a groove of the movement. But the position still is the same. You want to maintain that good form. You still want to be bracing your core. You still want your back to be straight. You still want to start fully standing. You still want to have slight bend in your knee. You still want to get into a good hinge. You still want your chest to only collapse as a byproduct of the hinge, right? You don't want to anticipate that forward lean and then round the back. And you also want to make sure that when you're getting into position and you're in that good hinge, you're not going too low. You don't want to drop too low to the floor and engage that lumbar more than we need to. So when you move into position, I'm in a good hinge, I drop into it, and I come up controlled. And that's the dumbbell RDL with a quick eccentric.